Hello and welcome, I am Thomas Porteous and you're watching NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top stories this hour. Hamas says it will coordinate with the Red Cross to deliver aid to Israeli hostages in Gaza. This is provided Israel meets conditions such as opening humanitarian corridors and halting airstrikes during aid distribution. The offer comes after a video of an emaciated captive sparked strong criticism from global leaders. At least 76 people have died and dozens more are missing after a boat carrying mostly Ethiopian migrants sank off Yemen, marking the latest tragedy on the dangerous sea route. The Philippine and Indian navies have sailed together for the first time in the South China Sea as President Ferdinand Marcos began his state visit to New Delhi. This follows the Philippines' increased maritime cooperative activities with foreign navies to counter China's expansive claims in the waterway. Sudanese paramilitary forces killed at least 14 civilians trying to escape El Fasher in Darfur, according to a rights group. Dozens more are injured and an undefined number were detained in the attack on Saturday. Beijing warns residents to prepare for another round of heavy rain with up to 200 millimeters expected over 6 hours. This comes a week after catastrophic floods killed dozens in the deadliest deluge to hit the capital since 2012. At least 2 people were killed and 10 others injured when a bus collided with a freight train in Russia's Leningrad region. The driver entered the crossing in front of the approaching train, according to the Regional Railway Administration. President Donald Trump confirms that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will visit Russia next week amid escalating tensions and a sanctions deadline. Trump also states that 2 nuclear submarines are now deployed to the region ahead of the US sanctions decision on Russia. President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney expect to talk in the coming days after the US imposes a 35% tariff on goods not covered by the US-Mexico-Canada trade agreement. Canadian officials remain hopeful a deal to lower tariffs is still possible. We start this hour in Europe, where a Ukrainian drone attack has damaged a power line and sparked a fire at a railway station building in Russia's southern region of Volgograd overnight, according to the regional administration. Governor for the region, Andrei Bokcharov, has said that an unexploded drone fell on the railway tracks near the Arcata train station. According to reports, no damage to the tracks has been reported. However, several regional trains were delayed in the area. Flights at the regional airport in the city of Volgograd were also halted for several hours, according to Russia's Civil Aviation Authority. This comes as Russia's defense ministry stated that its units destroyed a total of 61 Ukrainian drones overnight, including 6 over the Volgograd region. We're now joined by Mark Sutherland, who's a geopolitical analyst. He joins us live from London to discuss this further. Mark, thank you very much. Always a pleasure having you on the programme. Mark, I would like you to analyse Ukraine's drone and aerial strikes on Russia, the implications that it has for Moscow and its military capabilities. We obviously frequently hear of Russian strikes on Ukraine and the mass casualties that they cause, but not much about Ukraine's efforts on the Russian front. What more can you tell us about that?
By reading the information that we're all privy to, and over the last few days, it seems that, as the Ukrainians have said, that they are going for what they say is the Russian infrastructure in regards to supporting their war effort against Ukraine. A couple of days ago, they then they sent drones into an oil. There's some other tech batteries establishments that they also went for as well. So it appears, and again, we are still waiting for Russia to confirm even more on this, that is actually what is going on. They are attacking what they call are the Russian war machines. And as you and I can fully appreciate, like everyone else, that with this drone technology, with this modern technology that they now have access to, they are being provided. The Ukrainians are getting hold of that technology to then reverse that against the Russians, Josh.
Yes, and Mark, Russia claims to have intercepted 61 Ukrainian drones overnight. What does this say about the scale and frequency of Ukraine's current drone operations and also Russia's capability of countering them?
As other people observe, there is a knife edge here politically. I think within my own understanding of where Russia is at, because as these attacks then go further and further into Russia, reach other regions, including, it means that airports are then shut down for air safety as these drones are coming into their airspace, as trains, as we said, are disrupted, other train lines, delays, etc. This then starts to impede on the Russian people's lives. And if the Russians say, well, we've shot down 61 drones, in one way you can actually then look at that from a different point of view, which shows how many drones then the Ukrainians are then sending in their direction, if these reports are true. And as you fully appreciate, in any war, getting certain information and checking that and making sure that this is right takes time, because it's all part of the propaganda war. If you're then saying, well, we've shot down 61 of your drones, then basically if you're going to keep sending them, we are then going to shoot them down. We are relying on other people's information, and we are trying to ascertain the truth in this situation. But it is about, if this is happening more and more frequently, it's disrupting the lives of people in Russia, which means it then politically puts Putin in a difficult position. As we've said, you and I have constantly said over the last few weeks, we wish this war to end. We know about the suffering in regard to the Ukraine and the losses on both sides, Josh.
Mark, in the backdrop of this, Donald Trump said today that Special Envoy Steve Witkoff will visit Moscow to see Vladimir Putin to discuss this upcoming sanctions deadline, which is creeping up on Moscow now. What angle or approach do you think Witkoff is going to make? We've obviously seen Donald Trump sour on the Russian president in recent times, especially given that attack on the Ukrainian capital just days ago, where 31 people were killed. What sort of approach do you think the United States is going to come up to those talks with, especially given this sanctions deadline approaching?
Well, there's the carrot and the stick going on, Joshua, because President Trump has then recently, in the last week and a half, has turned around and said, we will now start sending more and more armaments into the Ukrainian theater of war. Now, he is then can do that via NATO. They then buy those and then forward that on to Ukraine. He is frustrated, and of course Putin is then hoping that Trump is then completely distracted by what is happening in the Middle East and Hamas, Israel, Iran, etc. So that is what's going on, and Witkoff really needs to be. He is then he's going in there to sound him out. But at the end of the day, it's down to Putin. Is this man going to turn around and say, right, okay, let's have a peace deal. Let's stop this war. At the same time, as we've just said, he's then seeing drones come into his country, and the effects of that. He's in a very, very difficult, in one sense, to some, he's in a difficult position, because economically, if oil refineries, as we've said, are damaged. So Witkoff will be, my opinion, will be balancing both of these, which is to say, yes, there's tariffs, because Trump is trying to use the economic weapon in this case, and it will be. It will affect Russia and their balance of payments, and there is huge questions over the state of their economy. And as you know, they are fully reliant on the oil and gas that they can then get out to the world, and they rely on that.
Yes, Mark, thank you very much. You are staying with us. We have some news coming in from the Middle East now, where Israel's Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar has issued a sharp condemnation of Hamas and Islamic Jihad, accusing them of using hostages as propaganda tools through starvation and torture. Speaking to international media, Sa'ar said the groups are engaged in a sadistic campaign, pointing to recent videos of emaciated hostages, and Sa'ar also slammed several Western countries for taking steps he claims strengthen Hamas and undermine ceasefire negotiations. He repeated Israel's demand for the immediate unconditional release of all hostages held in Gaza, warning that rewarding terror groups will only encourage future civilian kidnappings worldwide. We're once again joined by Mark Sutherland to get his brief analysis on this. Mark, hostage taking has been universally condemned by all parties in this conflict. However, Sa'ar has slammed the Western countries, presumably the United Kingdom, Canada and France, for recognising a Palestinian state. What do you think Sa'ar is trying to get out of these statements, especially in regarding him slamming this as propaganda?
The UK government, the Canadian government, France, we wait for Australia to do a pile-in, have said that unless Israel stops this war, then otherwise they will recognise a Palestinian state, inverted commas, joining Gaza and what the Israelis call Judea and Samaria, what others call under the PLO, Fatah, etc., call the West Bank. Basically, Hamas have turned around and said, no, we are not going to give up any gun, we're not going to give up any bullet, we will continue, we want a Palestinian state, and we want Jerusalem or East Jerusalem to be its capital. If you work it out in a geography lesson, at the end of the day, that means the annihilation in time of Israel. And the way that the hostages have been treated, which is beyond appalling, as we've just seen the pictures just over the weekend of Evinyat David, who looks like he is a member of Belsen or Auschwitz. They are playing on all of this. And what's happened, as the Hamas leadership has said, is that by the beginning of the recognition statements, this is then strengthened in Hamas's eyes their hand. They will keep hold of those hostages. That's all the bargaining tool that they have, as well as then accusing the Gaza Health Foundation, etc., and accusing Israel of not feeding the Gazan people. And we've just seen all of that propaganda play out here. It is a propaganda war, and on both sides, people are then giving their opinion. But we have just seen the pictures and the consequences of 250 hostages being taken, and at the moment there is still 50. I believe that 20 of those are still alive, and there are bodies to recover. And part of the Israeli government's mandate in this process since after the attack on the 7th of October has been to get the hostages back and to then get rid of Hamas, who sadly have turned that region, Gaza, into a rocket launching pad, and which is a huge effect, which is a huge threat to Israel and the citizens of its country. So this is what is playing out, and Hamas are using these appalling pictures to then, including, as we've said over a week ago, which I believe is in the New York Times, when they're saying that people are starving, and using a boy that sadly has cerebral palsy. This manipulation is for the world's emotion, And then when people have a left-wing ideology, I make it no excuses for saying that, then they are then pushing to say, well, we want to get rid of a particular nation over time, which is then in their eyes, which is Israel. Josh.
Mark, there has been a New York Times article where Israeli military officials have spoken anonymously to the New York Times and said that they have found no evidence of Hamas routinely or systemically stealing UN or other humanitarian aid. Obviously, they have said also that it is not just the hostages who are starving in the Gaza Strip. We've seen visuals. Gaza is facing famine. The UN has defined this as the worst case famine scenario, with over 83 children dying of starvation. What are your thoughts and analysis of this situation here? Is this still propaganda?
Just quickly then, and the New York Times, if I go back in history, was bestowing the delights of the Soviet Union, and they're not facing up to the reality of that under Stalin and what's going on. The issue is this: is again, it's down to propaganda. Am I saying that the people in Gaza are not suffering, and the reason why they are suffering is all at the hands of Hamas? As reports have come out, there has been many tons of food aid outside Gaza ready to go in, and because the UN did not want to work with the Gaza Health Humanitarian Aid Foundation, that food and distribution into Gaza was then held up. The GHF have given over 1 million meals to the people inside Gaza, whereas the UN has now admitted that their food trucks are then stolen by Hamas.
Mark, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry to interrupt you. We have to move on back over to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Apologies for interrupting you there. We move back to Russia, where the trial has opened in Moscow today of 19 people as suspected of involvement in the deadly attack on a Moscow concert hall that killed 149 people last year. Armed men had stormed the Crocus City Hall on March the 22nd of 2024, opening fire on people and then setting the building alight. It was one of the deadliest terror attacks on Russian soil in history. The Islamic State had claimed responsibility for the attack. The 4 suspected attackers, all Tajik nationals, and another 15 people accused of being accomplices, are on trial. According to the Moscow court website, the first 3 hearings are set to take place on Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday of this week. Despite the Islamic State claiming responsibility, Russia had implicated Ukraine in said attack, an allegation that Kiev called baseless and absurd. Reportedly, nearly half of the victims were killed by smoke and carbon monoxide inhalation from the fire that broke out, not from gunfire. We're now once again joined by Mark Sutherland to discuss this further. Mark, what more can you tell us about this situation that happened last year and the possible implications that it has on this trial?
The tragedy that unfolded was absolutely awful. Any death in this situation, absolutely terrible. It's interesting with, of course, at that time with the accusations saying the Ukrainians involved, etc. And as I've said, they denied that and said it's preposterous. I have no proof of any involvement in the certain things that I've seen. The other thing that is going to be a spin-off of this is the fact that Russia is reliant on migrant labor into its country, which according to them means that if you are reliant on the migrant labor that's coming into your country, who then is coming into your country? So that will then put them in a position. Does it mean that they then have to start having more and more controls in regard to who comes into their country? Are they then ethnically profiling people, which they have then been accused of doing? Does it mean that they then have to have biometrics and all that? That can be then the spin-off. the key thing in regard to the trial, and then when they arrested individuals, the whole thing of discussion of beating them up severely, etc. Well, they have then, according to the Russian authorities, then did appalling terrorist acts. So I can understand to some extent the emotional reaction in that. In regard to the trial, it will then be proving, are these people guilty?
Yes.
Now, that is then going to unfold, Joshua, but it's going to have some other interesting implications in regard to the security of Russia itself.
Mark Sutherland, thank you very much, as always, for joining us on the programme. Pleasure to get your insight. We now move back over to the Middle East, where at least 76 migrants have died and dozens more are missing after a boat carrying mostly Ethiopians sank off the coast of southern Yemen. The tragedy occurred near Abyan Governorate in the Gulf of Aden, a common route for migrants hoping to reach wealthy Gulf countries. Yemeni officials say 76 bodies have been recovered and 32 people have been rescued. The United Nations Migrancy Agency estimates that 157 people were on board the vessel. The International Organization for Migration says many migrants take this deadly route each year despite ongoing conflicts in Ethiopia and in Yemen. Migrants cross treacherous waters in the Bab al-Mandab Strait, often falling victim to abuse, exploitation and human trafficking. The IOM says hundreds died on this route last year alone. Yemeni security forces continue their search for bodies while many remain missing. We're now joined by Joyita Basu, who's the editorial director of the Sunday Guardian. Thank you very much, Joyita, for joining us. What more can you tell us about this tragic situation that has occurred in the Gulf of Aden, Joyita?
Well, the thing is, you see, this is one of the reasons why, I mean, there are reports that are coming in of agents basically making these people take that boat. And it seems, this is sadly, this is becoming a very common occurrence because there are these unscrupulous agents who try to, help these people infiltrate different economies, different countries which are better off in search for jobs. And people are so desperately poor in these areas, and not just there. I mean, many other countries, people are so desperately poor looking for a job that they kind of get lured by these agents into paying them money. And often what these agents do, they abandon them on the coast, and sometimes they are left on their own. And after that, what happens is that they are taken to these, and these boats are more often than not unsafe. And as we've seen, any kind of weather problem and all this kind of migrant boat sinking happens. This is not the first time this has happened. And I think recently even Pakistanis faced that. So, I think the problem is that, until and unless governments are proactive and catching this racket, they're busting this racket, such sad loss of human lives will continue to happen.
Yes, Joyita Basu, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. We now move on. Beijing has issued a warning for heavy rainfall today, with up to 200 millimetres expected across parts of the city over 6 hours. This comes just a week after catastrophic floods, which killed at least 44 people, mostly in the Miyun district. The floods, triggered by intense rainfall from July the 23rd to the 29th, saw many trapped as floodwaters surged rapidly, particularly at a nursing home. Authorities have raised preparedness levels to highest across all 16 districts. Outdoor attractions, including parts of the Great Wall of China, have been closed, and underground businesses halted to minimise risk. Experts have warned that flash floods and landslides are likely in the coming days. The flooding has raised broader concerns over China's ageing flood defences. Meanwhile, in Hebei province, 3 people have died and 4 remain missing after a riverslide wellness retreat was hit by rising floodwaters. In Guangdong, 5 people were swept away by torrential rains, with recovery efforts involving over 1,300 rescuers. This is the ongoing situation in China. As you can see, those visuals of water creeping up in civilian households. As we've said, 44 people lost their lives last week in the province, with many being swept away, infrastructure being damaged, and also travel being very, very much impacted by that as well. We will bring you all updates in regards to these Beijing rains as we get them. We're now joined by Joshua Barnes to give us some more information on this story. Joshua, what more can you tell us? What context can you bring to this developing situation?
Well, yes, absolutely, Thomas. Of course, the situation is concerning with further storm warnings at play. Of course, the northern areas of China and Beijing as well hit by devastating flooding after heavy rains, with admissions from officials, local officials, that potentially there were gaps in preparedness, and there are fears now that this potentially could come around again. You mentioned there that dozens of deaths reported, an extremely difficult situation, and some of the visuals that we've been showing highlighting the sheer level of devastation, not just to lives and families and communities, but also to infrastructure. Now, just a week later, potential for further flooding as well. A lot of these communities haven't had the time to fully recover and get over this incident, with further fears. Questions are going to be raised about whether that infrastructure is there and in place again. Of course, we wait to see how devastating this flooding could be. It is a situation that is, of course, one that we will be keeping an eye on, but worry for many of those living in northern regions of China. Tens of thousands of people were displaced, and potentially over 100,000 people displaced by the end of these heavy rains and extreme weather conditions. So hopefully for everyone living in that area of China, it won't be a repeat of what was seen. But I think afterwards, once the dust has settled and once these rains have calmed down, serious infrastructure questions are going to be asked, and key insights and investigations into quite how this can be avoided in the future.
Joshua, thank you very much for bringing that context. We now stay in the Indo-Pacific, where a New Zealand woman has been arrested on a child neglect charge after a 2-year-old was found alive inside a suitcase stowed in a bus luggage compartment. Authorities say the incident occurred during a planned stop at a settlement of Kaiwaka, north of Auckland, when a passenger requested access to the luggage area. The bus driver then noticed movement inside one of the bags. Upon opening the suitcase, the driver discovered the toddler, who was very hot but otherwise appeared to be physically unharmed. She was immediately taken to hospital, where she remains under observation. Detective Inspector Simon Harrison confirmed the arrest of a woman in connection with the incident. She had been charged with ill treatment or neglect of a child. Authorities have not released her name. We're once again joined by Joshua to give us more context on this story. Joshua, what more can you tell us about this situation that occurred in New Zealand?
Yes, Thomas, an extremely disturbing situation, but one that has ended in some positive news, at least for the welfare of the child. Recent reports coming from the hospital suggesting that the child is well, is not ill. Initial signs showed after the child was recovered from the suitcase was that the child was extremely warm, but of course risks and dangers surrounding a child being confined in a suitcase include issues potentially around carbon monoxide, of course suffocation as well. An extremely disturbing situation at play. The 27-year-old parent, who hasn't been named by courts, is expected in courts again. A charge has been placed over neglect, but local officials are commending the driver in this situation for acknowledging that something didn't seem right. The driver saw some movement coming from a suitcase at a scheduled stop along this route, and it was the driver's intuition that made him check, and of course this situation has now unfolded. Extremely disturbing, but the child is well. We have had that confirmation through from hospital officials that monitoring took place. This could have been an extremely concerning situation, but thankfully the child is well.
Joshua, thank you very much for bringing that context. Well, that is all that we have time for this hour, but we will continue to bring you more news updates from around the world. Thank you very much for joining us.